Just a few moments ago, Donald Trump officially became the Republican nominee for president for the third time in a row. And just moments before that, he announced on Truth Social that he has selected Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his running mate. The start of the Republican National Convention taking place at an incredibly tense and volatile moment for the entire country. Less than 48 hours after an assassination attempt on the ex-president, a shooting that left one person dead, two others critically injured. If we see Donald Trump today, it will be his first public appearance since that horrific and tragic incident. It is violence that is deeply corrosive to our democracy. We all unequivocally condemn it in the strongest terms possible. And as my colleague Rachel Maddow puts it, quote, there is no violent solution to any American political conflict. We would also like to extend our sympathies to the family of Corey Compatore. He was tragically killed while shielding his family, while keeping his family safe from the gunfire that erupted at that rally. No one should ever be at risk when they attend a political rally. An investigation by the FBI is now underway. President Joe Biden has addressed the nation 3 times over the last 2 days, calling for all Americans to lower the temperature. In an address from the Resolute desk last night, he'll be sitting down with NBC's Lester Holt for an interview that airs later tonight right here on MSNBC. And believe it or not, there's more. More news, that is. In a stunning decision that is likely to set up another high-stakes legal battle, Judge Aileen Cannon has dismissed the Trump classified documents case in its entirety. The case is done from her perspective. In her ruling, she decides that the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was in and of itself unconstitutional. Washington Post reports that the Department of Justice is highly likely to appeal the decision, and reports that the case could very well wind up before the United States Supreme Court. We'll have full coverage of that decision and its fallout later in the broadcast. But we return now to Milwaukee, where the nominating process is still underway. Later in this hour, delegates will formally nominate J.D. Vance as the Republican candidate for vice president. Joining us now in Milwaukee at the RNC, NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard and MSNBC anchor Katy Tur. Here with me at the table for the hour, former U.S. Senator, co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill, and former Congressman and MSNBC political analyst David Jolly. Vaughn Hilliard, what have you got?
Well, we've got the fact that J.D. Vance of Ohio is going to be the running mate for Donald Trump here, potentially serving in the capacity that Vice President Mike Pence once served. Of course, Mike Pence of Indiana is not apparently here for this week, but J.D. Vance, who has only served now 18 months in the U.S. Senate, we expect here potentially any moment is going to be making his way down this aisle here to potentially take the stage. This would be the first time that we see J.D. Vance here in Ohio. Of course, this is the man who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, rose to prominence as the author, and was a one-time deep public critic of Donald Trump, calling his rhetoric abhorrent and somebody who he referred to as an idiot, somebody who he was led to suggest that he would vote for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump in 2016. And yet, in so many ways, J.D. Vance is the story of the modern Republican Party. Somebody who 8 years ago said that he was a never Trump Republican, here in 2024 is about to become formally the running mate to Donald Trump to serve in the capacity of Vice President of the United States for the next 4 years. And for J.D. Vance and his allies, he saw Don Jr. as one on the front lines. I had the chance to ask Don Jr. about this election, and he behind the scenes had suggested that this was an effort there, and somebody who he knows will be loyal and somebody who will be able to be effective in working and carrying out the policies of Donald Trump. Of course, I was talking to Senator Tuberville of Alabama, who said for the 18 months he had worked to build up a collegiate relationship with his colleagues, a good relationship with those Republican members of the Senate, if they are able to take the Senate majority Republicans here in 3.5 months. Of course, J.D. Vance could be an effective conduit for Donald Trump in that capacity come 2025.
Vaughn Hilliard, I feel like in that perfect bit of reporting on the arc of J.D. Vance, and I'm all for arcs, I've been through one myself in my political journey, he also described Donald Trump as America's Hitler. And it's notable because he was the first person to come out and point to the media and Democrats with some of their commentary about Donald Trump for his own critiques of Donald Trump. They're notable not just because he was so completely against him, but the language was some of the most vitriolic language used against Donald Trump by Republicans at the time.
Right. I think that this is, when you look at the aftermath, let's be very clear. The attempted assassination was less than 48 hours ago. And for the likes of J.D. Vance, if you compare it and contrast it to Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor who is under consideration, Doug Burgum came out with a statement that was much more in lines of sending prayers to Donald Trump and his family during this time here. And on the other hand, J.D. Vance was quite explicit in his social media post saying that the Biden administration and the rhetoric that Donald Trump was a threat to democracy and a fascist, that was what contributed to an individual taking aim at Donald Trump here. The stakes of what we are talking about are so high, and clearly we are talking about what kind of individual would Donald Trump look in a running mate. We've had that conversation ever since Mike Pence was booted in the aftermath of January 6th. And we knew that he would look for somebody who is loyal, and that is where you saw a cadre of individuals from Senator Tim Scott, who was a one-time, I think, reticent Republican towards Donald Trump, come out on the campaign trail in New Hampshire and campaign repeatedly for him. Doug Burgum, somebody who said 1 year ago that he wouldn't go into business with Donald Trump in a business capacity 1 year ago, come out and seek the endorsement. Marco Rubio, who 8 years ago covered on the campaign trail when he suggested that he had third world leader, strongman type rhetoric. He going seeking this vice presidency. I think it speaks to the way that Donald Trump has effectively shaped this Republican Party and in his image over the last 8 years. And Nicole, we had conversations in 2022 when J.D. Vance was running for the U.S. Senate. He was not the only Republican running for that Ohio Senate seat. There were several other candidates seeking Donald Trump's endorsement, yet he got the Trump Act endorsement. And almost every single one of those Trump Act candidates in 2022 won their Republican primaries. And then, of course, the general election was a different story. The people like Carrie Lakes and Tudor Dixon, they didn't win in November. But J.D. Vance, he was the one unusual Trump Act candidate. He did win. And ever since winning that Senate seat, he has been loyal to Donald Trump, in his corner, early endorser of him in his presidential run when some sat on the sidelines, when the likes of Governor DeSantis and Nikki Haley were still in this. J.D. Vance, clearly, he returned the favor very clearly after winning that Senate seat with Donald Trump's endorsement, and in turn endorsed Donald Trump. And now here in the heart of July, in the summer of 2024, he has been named, J.D. Vance, the running mate to Donald Trump in 2024.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.